Hey everybody, welcome back to our show, the first of many in 2021. That's right, I said 2021.
Yeah.
We have taken it on the road for our first episode, about 30 minutes north of the club, right up I-95. And we found ourselves here in Madison, Connecticut at Peak Performance Therapy and Wellness. We are joined by Brian Tenenhaus, the owner and physical therapist here at the facility. Brian, we are excited to talk to you about how what you offer here at the facility can help our players at the club, both on and off the court.
Heck yeah. So thank you for having me, first of all.
No worries.
And yeah, it's just a pleasure. I've known Ryan in many ways, but especially in a tennis sense for, I was just talking to someone, so since 1999.
Wow.
And which is kind of crazy because that means it's our 20-year anniversary of knowing each other.
That's
super cool.
I was 4.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Boy.
I was 4.
Yeah, he's still in the young. We're old, I guess,
Not
now. Right?
old.
No, we decided we're experienced.
You're experienced.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I think experience turns into, there's stages.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah, of course.
So one of our goals here with our show is obviously to talk a lot about tennis, but it's also to bring knowledgeable content to our players at the club. And we have come to the right spot here today. Brian not only has played tennis at a very high level throughout his entire career, but he also trains in Ironman, Tough Mudders, anything physical. His body is in tip-top shape. And again, for me, who might not take care of themselves as much as I should,
Absolutely not.
I look up to him a lot for advice and what to do on and off the court. So today we have come here to talk a little bit with Brian about what he has to offer here at the club. I was really lucky to be able to come and spend some time with you a couple weeks ago. He ran through kind of like an hour long workout, did some exploratory work on the table to kind of pinpoint some of my ailments. And I'm not gonna lie, it was really helpful. I felt really energized once I finished, and excited to be back here again. So you are let's see if I can get this right, you are a certified
Functional
manual therapist. Again, that is a certified functional manual
It
therapist.
took me like 4 or 5 years to figure it out too, so it's all good.
Did you not know your title exactly when you first started?
Well, it took me several years to get the title.
That's
and
fair.
The first few years, I was like, "What are we called again? What we're trying to get?" Okay, CFMT.
See there, I should have just gone with that. So you're a CFMT. Can you get into a little bit about what that is specifically, and then also how does that set you apart from other physical therapists in the industry?
Yeah. So to start out with, the name literally means nothing.
Great.
CFMT. Most people, no one knows what a CFMT is, and that's totally fine. But what we do is really what does set us apart. A functional manual therapist is somebody who uses their hands and their brain to try to treat the whole body. And so, the first thing to point out is there's 40,000 physical therapists in the country. Of those 40,000, there's maybe a few thousand who are manual therapists, which means they treat with their hands majority or all of the physical therapy session. And that's a big deal. Physical therapy, a long time ago, before the insurance companies started to drive everything, was all about hands-on. You went in with a hamstring strain and your therapist touched your leg.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but nowadays not every physical therapist does that. And so that's one of the things that just sets me apart.
Okay.
I'm going to look at your pelvis. If you come in and say like I pulled my hamstring or I tweaked my hamstring a few weeks ago, or maybe even I've got somebody who comes in, it's been a year and a half and it's still not right. Mm-hmm. I've been to many therapists, I've seen a couple of chiropractors, every doctor I go to says, well, you should go get some physical therapy.
Yeah.
So is your pelvis off, for instance? Sometimes your pelvic alignment could be shifted or in a torsion. Do you have a leg length discrepancy? So sometimes somebody has one leg that's a little bit longer than the other. That could be that you were born that way, or more often than not, it's more that your legs have shifted that way because of activities that you do. So runners, for instance, and especially in New England, the road is more what we call beveled because they got to focus on drainage in the Four Seasons. So if somebody runs, 50, 60 miles a week is not uncommon for some of these runners. and they're always running into oncoming traffic the way you're supposed to, your left leg is always going to be reaching the ground later or longer than your right. So that can create like a functional leg length discrepancy, just as an example. You know, playing tennis is a very asymmetrical sport. So, you know, somebody like myself, I played many years of tennis, and I've never developed a great, strong, solid backhand. And so I ran around probably 75% of, you know, I would hit 75% of the balls would be forehands, if not more.
90%.
95%.
Let's be real here. 90%.
That causes, so you're constantly rotating one way and occasionally rotating the other way.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, that's kind of created idiopathic means you're born with, so whatever it is that you're not born with, a developed over the many years, a behavioral scoliosis is something that I deal with. And most people these days, you set them up and you look at them and you say, oh wow, they definitely are a little bit off. So just thinking about that stuff makes me different than a traditional PT who, if you go in and say, oh yeah, I hurt my shoulder, and they say, a lot of times they don't really have much time, they don't really listen to you very long, maybe for 20 minutes they'll listen to some of what you have to say, they don't ask a ton of questions, and before you know it, you're doing the exact same 6 exercises that every other shoulder patient has been given. And then, in addition to that, they are not, you know, they're not going to put their hands on you. Or if they do, it's for 5 or 10 minutes. So when Ryan and I were hanging out the other day, you know, a good physical therapist, if you come in with complaints of shoulder or neck pain, you gotta treat both of those right off the bat. The neck and the shoulder, they go hand in hand. So you need to spend time on that. You got to spend time on the AC joint, which is the end of where the clavicle and the acromion is the front of the shoulder blade. So they meet right here at the point where this white line intersects here. So that's your AC joint. You got to treat that joint. You got to treat where the clavicle meets the rib cage right here. You got to treat the ribs 1, 2, 3, 4, and some of those other areas. You got to treat the soft tissues, the muscles, the fascia. There's so much that you got to treat, and a lot of these therapists just don't get their hands dirty. And unfortunately, it's because they're spending so much time writing notes, because basically a lot of times their bosses or whoever wants them to treat so many people per day, and yada yada yada. So that's kind of a really long answer to explain, though, what makes this different and why this is better.
Well, I mean, you couldn't have been more detailed in how you dove into it, which is eye-opening for me, because I've gone to physical therapists because of my back issues and whatnot, and you've basically described exactly what it was. I did get better. It took a long time to get better, but I felt like every time I came back, it was that same thing over and over again. So that's exciting to hear from you. I would ask the question, you know, let's say one of our players does get hurt.
Yep.
You know, what is the process in deciding on whether to go see a doctor or whether to go see, you know, your generic physical therapist, or to seek out someone who's more specialized like yourself, or just to leave it alone and to let it rest?
Yep. So I think some of that is actually how you were raised and how you are as a parent. A lot of times, you know, you have some people who their kid falls or bumps their head and they immediately rush them to the doctor and go, you know, get them checked out, and other people wait, and you're like, your kid's arm is hanging up. You should probably get them checked out.
Yeah.
So I mean, the bottom line is I tend to sort of say, like, you know, when it's an emergency, okay? Yeah. Like, my daughter just broke her arm a few months ago. You look at it and you're like, okay, we got to get her to the doctor. Let's be calm, but let's act swiftly. Okay, then there's times, most of the time it's not an emergency. Okay, most of the time it's a situation where throw some ice on, take some anti-inflammatories, you know, figure out, like, okay, you know, is this something that's been nagging me, or is this something that really has been going on for, you know, just happened, and I felt a pop. It was a loud pop, and it was very painful, and now I can't move my arm at all. Yeah. You know, that's the type of thing where I'm thinking, all right, you know, you probably are going to want to get some imaging done with the doctor. Maybe not, but I mean, imaging may need to wait, you know, 4 to 6 weeks, because a lot of things do actually get better in the first week or two. I mean, especially at our age, you know.
Not yours. No, you got like 2 more years.
So Yeah, so
That's terrifying. Thanks.
I'm able to, I'm not afraid to send people to the doctor. First off, I'm a big advocate for going to the doctor when it's time, and so I like a lot of people just come to me right from the beginning and say, hey, my son hurt his knee at practice. Do you think I can bring him by sometime this week or on Monday? And usually I can kind of figure out from there, like, yeah, he definitely should get to the doctor. He's going to probably need crutches, this, that, and the other. But a lot of times it really doesn't need to be seen by the doctor right away.
Okay.
Now, within a couple weeks, you should see results. If you're not seeing any changes, if you're not seeing, if their symptoms are getting worse, there's a lot of signs that you can look for. Mm-hmm. And those are the times where it's like, all right, you know what? I thought that this was going to get better within the first, 2 sessions or week or so. You've been taking your anti-inflammatories. You've been icing it pretty regularly, and you've been taking it easy. You didn't go back and play tennis 3 times and paddle twice.
Yeah. Which is actually my adult players, they have the hardest time staying away.
Yeah.
Playing tennis, playing platform, playing pickleball, they love it, and then all of those sports are addictive. But when someone gets tennis elbow,
they go to a different sport and then they continuously injure themselves because they say, oh, it's not as strenuous as tennis, but in reality, it's actually more. Paddle weighs more than a tennis racket, so it gets worse for them instead of getting better.
Right, and honestly, the answer I always give them is the answer they don't want to hear, which is you need to take time off and you need to rest it and then see. So I think it's hard sometimes for them to stay.
Honestly, I think you just answered the question. If you take a week off and potentially have iced it a couple days and maybe even taken some anti-inflammatories, and your pain is just as bad as it was when you first heard it, then that's a problem. Okay? But until you take a little bit of time off, I deal with runners, I deal with tennis or racket athletes. If you're not willing to take a little time off, then to me, there's no sense in going to see the doctor because they're going to sell you the same exact thing that we're telling you. Mm-hmm. To start with, sure, if you have a huge tournament you got to go through and you want to get some stronger anti-inflammatories to try to help you get through the tournament, now that's a different story. But you're spot on. The first thing you need is rest, and if you can't see that you're making some nice gains with the rest, all right, maybe go to the PT. If you see a little progress, go to the PT or go to some specialist. If you see a ton of progress, then guess what? You didn't need to see the doctor. You just need to figure out now, okay, let's get back to it maybe a little slower.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. So to sum up what you're saying for the viewers is maybe the best route is to get the eval first from someone like yourself or someone that knows what injury you may or may not have, and then if it doesn't seem like it's working, then you go see the doctor.
I think that's definitely a big part of it.
Now, from my understanding, you service a large variety of people, whether they're young kids to adults. Can you talk a little bit about how you service tennis players specifically? And are there differences between, let's say a 10 or 12-year-old kid that you see because they are hurt and they're rehabbing as opposed to maybe someone who's a little bit more advanced in age that, maybe has nagging injuries or, has bad habits just because of their lifestyle over, a long amount of time? Yeah,
so there's some interesting differences for sure. When it comes to tennis players, for sure, you got to think about age. For instance, if you mentioned a 12-year-old. I mean, there's a very important point in a kid's life when they go through that big growth spurt. And for boys and girls, it's a little bit different. If you're trying, we do some strength training work here as well, and you want to capitalize on that growth spurt because it's a fantastic time to grow stronger. But it's also a time where you lose a lot of flexibility if you're not careful. Wow. So I've definitely worked with some boys and girls who've kind of shot up there in height or their limbs get longer, which, again, as a tennis player, it's great to have long arms and, long reach and what have you. But if your hamstrings are not keeping up with the length of your bones, which is not uncommon, or your quads, then it can cause all sorts of lower back and leg, hip problems.
So you're saying I missed my opportunity when I was 12 and I had my first growth spurt?
Yes.
That's what has gone on for the rest of my life?
Exactly.
Yeah, just your growth spurt hindered you from going pro.
I have the tightest hamstrings ever. Throw my back out multiple times.
Sad.
That could be a different problem, though.
Yeah, see?
See?
He's already doing his job.
See?
He's already doing his
I'm
job.
analyzing right now as we speak. So I work with all sorts of. Let's just talk about tennis players since that's what we're here for today.
Sure.
A kid who's 10 doesn't have to worry about that growth spurt for at least a couple years. So we're looking at them differently than maybe a 16-year-old girl versus a 25-year-old guy or a 45-year-old male or female. So a lot of times it really is overuse and or it's like trying to do something that their body just can't handle not to say anymore, but their body has to be strong enough to handle what the load that they're asking it to do. So sometimes, tennis elbow is a funny thing because so many people talk about tennis elbow. If you're strong, Ryan is a strong guy, and so he's when he switched around between a two-hander or a one-handed backhand, for instance, some of it is technique. But to be totally honest, even if he had perfect technique, if he didn't have the strength in his forearm, his shoulder, and his hips, then he could still hurt his elbow.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things that people don't quite understand. Like if they're in a private lesson and they're practicing and they're trying and their form's good and their grip's the correct grip, and they're like, but my elbow's been killing me. What's the problem? Do I need an injection? Do I need steroids? And it's like, well, you just hit like 75 single-handed backhands and you put a lot of load on like this tiny little muscle here.
Yeah.
So the whole point is you have to have the neuromuscular capacity. You have to have the correct motor control pattern.
Okay.
And, you have to have a few other things. Maybe they're just using the wrong grip,
Sure.
wrong racket, or a grip that's a little too small, too big. You got to look at everything. And those are the things where having my tennis background, it helps when I say, well, bring in your tennis shoes, bring in your racket. I want to see these things. They right away, they're like, oh, really? I'm like, yeah, because I actually know how to hold a racket.
Yeah, that's
and
awesome.
So, I know the tennis pros know that as well, if not better than me, but what they don't know is potentially that when you're swinging, you're not necessarily doing this as well, or your just shoulders are really weak, and you need to get stronger with that.
I love that. And for tennis players, what's one thing that you usually tell them before they come in, or what you usually do?
Sorry, say that again?
One of the first things, since this is a tennis show, in a sense, I wanted to ask you, what's the first thing that you tell your clients before coming in when it deals with a tennis-related injury or problem or nagging sensation that they're feeling? What's the first thing that you usually tell them or advice that you give them before they come in?
Yeah. So, to start out with, I a lot of times they found me either because somebody like you sent them to me, or they saw on on my website or something along those lines. Hey, I saw that you're a tennis guy, and I'm like, yeah, no, I have several years experience teaching as well as playing. So yes, I love working with tennis players. And it's not that different than working with runners or other types of people. You always have to look at the movement. You have to look at their body individually. You got to look at obviously if it's a tennis serve that gives them pain, then we say, all right, well bring in your racket, bring in your tennis shoes. Especially if it's a lower body thing. I want to see what kind of shoes they're in. But ultimately, I like to look at it through the eyes of a tennis pro, through the eyes of a tennis player, and obviously, most importantly, through the eyes of a biomechanical analyst, which is what I am now. I love working with my hands, but I also really enjoy using my brain and my visual. So I bring them into this space. I have them swing. Sometimes if it's nice out, we'll go outside. We can't obviously serve and do things like that, but I'll have them go through the service motion. Okay. Or if it's a movement related thing, I'll have them move out in the parking lot area, and I want to see how they move.
Okay.
And then, it's just the approach that we have is the same for everyone, whether it's just getting in and out of their car that gives them a ton of back pain, or if it's their serve or their overhead motion. I need to see, do they have the neuromuscular strength and capacity to do what they're trying to do?
Yeah.
do they have the motor control, which means, do they swing correctly? And again, I say, I'm not your tennis pro, okay? I'll leave that up to the guys or the gals who are teaching you, your coach or whoever. But I do want to see if your motion is the problem, because if it is, then I might be telling the pro, like, hey, I'm not saying that. Here's a great example: the kick serve. Okay, Ryan, one of the best kick serves I've ever seen. Actually, this guy has a beautiful kick serve, but your shoulder, your rib cage, your lower back, your neck, all have to be able to move a certain way. You're asking your shoulder to go in a very, very different and unhealthy position. Okay? So then...
You're alive then.
I don't know.
But then you ask them, like, okay, let's talk a little bit more about your warm-up habits. Do you just go, like, especially college kids, like you get 5 minutes now, I think, to warm up, like, everything. I mean, now granted, you hopefully warm up as a team for half an hour or an hour beforehand, but... I was always known on the team, the guy who needed a lot more extra serves and whatever. But the point is, if you're going to try to kick serve, like the very first serve of the match, and you only did maybe 12 or 15 serves total on the add and deuce side, your shoulder is not really in a great place to do that. So you're 18, you're 20 years old, you can kind of do that. But now you're 25, you're 35 years old, you've ground up the joints in there a little bit, you've shredded up a little bit of the rotator cuff, and perhaps even developed a little bit of a bone spur now.
Wow.
Okay? So the whole point is that if I look at some of these things, I could see 2 or 3 swings in the parking lot or in the gym space and say, okay, so that's the problem. It's not that you have a weak rotator cuff. Yeah, you can do these rotator cuff strengthening exercises all day, every day, but that's only like maybe 10% of the problem. Your kick serve, which, by the way, they say that's when it really hurts, is the problem. So then we think, all right, do we need to talk strategy? Do we need, then we look at other avenues. But having the background of tennis is really helpful with something like that.
That's really interesting that you say that, because I feel like when you go to a physical therapist, they talk a lot about what you should be doing when you're not playing, and to strengthen and to do whatever. But not so much like, hey, I am a tennis player, I'm going to go and play tennis, I'm going to continue to do this. What should I be doing the 30 minutes before? And I think that's a really, really interesting aspect, and something that maybe our viewers can, take to heart, whether it's using bands to warm up their shoulder joints, or making sure that they're doing some stretching before, some dynamic stretching as opposed to that static stretching, right? We want to do that dynamic before, as we're cold and we're warm up our body, get the blood flowing. That's really cool. That's really important. And honestly, like, we have a lot of adults and juniors who play at the club, and there are few and far between that take the time before they go out on the court to do that.
Yeah, I mean, and truth be told, like, you're paying for 60 minutes, right? Or you're paying for 90 minutes.
Yeah.
And we're all busy. But, I mean, good Lord, like, a lot of people are working from home these days. There's no reason you can't be doing a little bit of stuff like this
100%.
while you're on a speakerphone call or something like that. There's actually a lot of time in our day to take care of our body, and we just happen to throw our stuff in the car, rush out, get to the court 5 minutes early, get on the court, and we're just happy that we have both of our shoes and whatever. But then you wonder why, and then you do that, two nights out of 3, and then sprinkle in a little paddle, for 2 hours, 4 nights later, and you're like, oh my gosh, something's killing me. Yeah. Well, it kind of makes perfect sense.
Do you have any tips or tricks? So, like, you're very active within your lifestyle. You obviously are super busy with 2 young kids at home. Between you and your wife, what do you do with that amount of time that you have or don't have to make sure that you're staying healthy and balancing that with life? Because you're a runner, you play tennis, I know you swim, you've done Ironmans, you've done Tough Mudders, kind of like everything, and you've always been super high energy and active and healthy. Can you give our players any tips and tricks to maybe your routine that'll help them prevent injury, as well as if they do get injured, making sure that their body is good to go?
Yeah, so I mean, the 2 very most integral things to me that so many people are missing the boat on is diet and nutrition. I mean, I'm not saying that I have the healthiest diet, but it actually is pretty.
I'm out the window on this one. I'll see you later.
Sorry, I didn't actually mean diet and nutrition. I meant sleep and nutrition. So, so nutrition is very important, and you know what you're putting in is your fuel. Like especially when I started doing Ironman training, you stop looking at food as something that creates joy in your life, and you almost start looking at it as like when you go to the gas station, you're like, all right, well, I'm about to do this. If I'm going to try to run tomorrow for 2.5 hours, then I need to make sure I get this, blah, 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 blah. So the first thing is what you're putting in, and so that could be a whole nother, you know, talk. And then sleep. Those are, you know, I was at an Ironman where some of the professionals they're on a panel just like this, and they were talking about sleep and just how important it is. And I think so many people don't have good sleep hygiene. They don't have good general nutrition. And then just being happy. Like you talk about me being energetic, and I agree. I have a lot of energy. I sleep well. I sleep hard. But I also am a happy person. So I have good outlets. I have things that make me happy. The people around me, my job. Obviously my family, that's huge. And if you're happy, then it's easier to have energy. And if you're eating well and sleeping well, then it kind of circles all together. So to me, that's like the basics. If you only have 20 minutes a day you're doing all those things right, I think you got to do, you know, it obviously varies person to person. There's some people, I don't want to make any generalizations, but some people spend way too much time focusing on mobility, aka yoga and stretching, and then other people spend way too much time on strength training, aka lifting weights.
Sure.
Even Pilates is essentially, Pilates is a nice blend between strengthening and mobility, but you have to have a blend, and you can't overdo it. So, like, you know, I ran 40 miles for my 40th birthday. That was a few months ago.
Oh my God.
And people were shocked when I told them I was only running 3 days a week.
Well, he got tired driving here for 30 minutes. You would die running for 40 miles. You actually wouldn't make it. No.
So, but to me, it's mental. And it's the fact that I was putting just as much stock in rest and recovery, because I was, to be truth be told, I was nervous that I was going to get hurt, because I was kind of coming off of about 5 years of not doing that much other than trying to be dad of the year or something along those lines. Yeah. So I basically was like, all right, I'm just going to do 2 short-ish runs a week, like 3 or 4 miles, and then my long run was on Fridays. And I just very carefully and incrementally built up that long run. But the whole point is, again, balancing the rest with the work, and then I cleaned up my nutrition pretty good during that 4 or 5 months of my life. Like, I was really focused on it, because I realized, like, the fear of, this is not necessarily a gimme. Like, this is not a 2-foot putt or a 1-foot putt.
And honestly, I find, so my wife is super active. She actually played college tennis with us as well. She has gotten big into working out and running a lot. And one of the things that we talk about a lot of times is, she kind of goes hard 7 days a week. And I try to say, like, you should take a day off. Yeah. Is that important to do? You're talking about the rest and the sleep. Yeah. But even for our players that are consistently bothered by this stuff, shoulder, neck, whatever, knees, and they're playing tennis 3 times a week and paddle a couple more times, when is that threshold where you say, listen, for the good of the rest of the week, so that I actually want to play and have fun and feel good and be happy? Right. What is that threshold for saying, I'm going to take this day off every week, or these 2 days off, or whatnot? Yeah. So that's such a good question, and I think the answer is, you can't change. Some people just have to have an outlet almost every day. They have to have something physical, but they need, to me, those are the people that need variety. They need to be kayaking, hiking, walking, biking, running, tennis. They need it all. Golf. And those are the ones who are the healthiest. If you're going to be a runner and you're going to run 6 or 7 days a week, by all means, go for it, and make sure you get my information when you're done. And the same goes for racket sports. True. I mean, it's a very asymmetrical sport. I can't emphasize that enough. Now, if you just want to go hit ground stroke bashing at the baseline and do that, to me, that's a lot healthier. If you do that for 30 minutes or an hour,
3 days a week, and then you play a real match twice a week, and then you sprinkle in a paddle once a week. That's still pushing it, but at least baseline ground strokes and volleys are much easier on the body. Maybe not so much the hips and knees and ankles, but it's definitely easier on the shoulder than trying to hit overheads and serves a lot. That's where you really got to be careful. And if you're trying to go pro, then by all means, I'm sure you could argue the best tennis players in the world play a lot.
Sure.
6-7 days a week for for 10 months out of the year or more. But what's the average lifespan of those players? And how many of them go through a career injury free?
So let me ask you this, in terms of the pro aspect, how important is it for them to play other sports or just do different activities so that way they're not constantly in that same repetition? I know it's their life and I know it's their passion and their job, but is there a way that they can last longer in a sport if they do different activities?
So we're talking the highest echelon.
Yeah, highest.
Yeah. So for them, to me, I think to avoid mental burnout, it's important that they have still something else. Like I still remember, I don't know, I think I was thinking of a story with Lindsey Vonn, and she's a big skier, kind of a has-been now, but hearing some stories about her and some of the sports that she used to do kind of on the side. Yeah. But to me, your highest echelon tennis players, they're going to be playing a ton of tennis. However, to supplement that, if we want to compare ourselves to the pro athletes, then we need to treat ourselves like pro athletes, which means you're not getting 5 to 6 hours a night of sleep. Yeah. Right. You're not eating garbage, okay? Right. And you're doing mobility stuff, which means yoga, which means significant stretching, not 5 to 10 minutes of stretching. If you want to compare yourself to the pros, then you need to treat your body like the pros, which means getting body work done at least once a week. A lot of times those pro or the highest level players are seeing chiropractors, physical therapists, massage therapists, any one of or all if they have the resources. I actually volunteered at the finish line, so basically the highest elite runners at the Boston Marathon several years ago, and I got to sort of see what was going on with these guys and gals, the top 20 runners in male and female, immediately after the race. Okay. It's not just one person laying on the table. There's a whole team. Yeah. So I always have to remind people that think they want to compare themselves to the pros. I say, well, then treat yourself like a pro. Mm-hmm. Start eating correctly, start sleeping correctly, and make sure that you're seeing someone, like I work with people on maintenance all the time. Yeah. So that's another sort of big thing that differs me between someone like me and versus your traditional PT. A lot of people are doing fine. They just want to stay fine. They want to find their highest level of efficiency and potential. And that's where they'll see me, once a week, once every 2 or 3 weeks, just to make sure that their shoulder stays healthy so they can get through the summer season where they know they're playing literally, 2 matches a day sometimes. Absolutely.
Gotcha. That's interesting stuff. So for our club players, our tennis players, our pickleball players that are flooding into the courts, get your rest. Yeah. Eat right. Mm-hmm. Understand that, if you're hurting, don't just put it off and pop some pills to get through that day. Really take a look at what you're doing with your lifestyle. If you love these sports so much, put some stock into what you can do beforehand to prevent the stuff that's happening. And if you are ailing, go see my friend right here. Yeah. Now, quickly, before we end. Yes. Quick fire tennis questions. Are you ready? I'm going to ask and then you're going to ask. And he has to answer as quickly as he can.
Let me add one more thing while you think of your questions.
Yes.
After exercise too, that stretching or that mobility work after you play is also important. So when we were talking about all these other things, but I realized I didn't really mention that sort of like when you're done with that hour on the court or what have you, your match, you don't have to do it the second you get off the court, but when you get home, take your shower and again, that's the difference between the pro or the high level D1 player versus just sort of, an amateur who's really not doing the right thing. All right, I'm ready.
Yeah, cool.
I think. You first.
All right, favorite tennis player of all time and why?
Well, that's such a toss-up between Rafa and Andre, so I guess if I have to really pick one, I'm going to go with Andre. Yes. Because we have the same hairstyle.
I was about to say.
I mean, that guy's just...
similarities.
I think as a human, I love Rafa currently, but I don't really, to be honest, know as much about him as I'd like. I think I'd love to read some books about him in the future when he gets older. But I read, the book about Andre, and, I got to see him as a little one when I was probably 10, 15 years old, and I saw him so many times, and, to know what he's been through, and still, he's a huge, what's the word? He's an ambassador to the game of tennis, which I love. I don't know, what are him and Steffi's kids, how old are they now, and are they any good?
Agassi's son is now a pitcher at USC.
Oh, no.
Whoa! So now I feel really old.
He just got recruited.
So he's a beast of an athlete. Chose not to go into tennis, which I bet you both parents said don't do it.
Yeah, right.
Probably.
That's
probably
cool.
said
He's
no.
a pitcher at USC.
I believe so. To my knowledge, he was just recruited
cool.
D1. So
wow, that's amazing. That's
so great. My question is, forehand or backhand?
I mean,
favorite one?
Obviously forehand. I got a very, very closed semi-western. Maybe you'd even call it a western, but a heavy forehand. When it goes, it's fun to hit. But these days, it's not going anywhere but long, wide, or.
Let me just tell you, playing the majority of players that everyone plays are right-handed. Mm-hmm. To play a left-handed, he's left-handed, right? Okay. See, his view just changed on me. Okay. To play someone left-handed, first of all, is awkward in itself because everything is backwards.
I hate it.
But then to play someone who will literally do everything they can to not hit a backhand, that's super fun. And then to top it on off, they never miss a ball because they're in top shape. I mean, we used to battle all the time. Even after school, we'd wake up early mornings and play. Yep. So to that, we both played collegiate tennis at Quinnipiac University.
Woo woo! Bobcats.
There we go. And what is your favorite memory playing for the Bobcats?
Oh, man. So, I guess cumulatively, I wonder if a lot of athletes are this way. I have some terrible memories in terms of worst losses, ones where I those are the ones that stick out the most. But I had a stretch where I won 13 matches in a row.
Wow!
And my last name is Tenenhaus, and the boys and girls called me 13-in-house for a hot minute. Love it. So that was pretty fun because I kind of came out of nowhere where I was. For the first 2 years, I basically didn't play, and I was going to quit the team, and my coach and a couple people kind of called me that summer and were like, no, we didn't have a ton of recruits. We want you to come out. Just let's see how it goes. And caught a couple breaks and finally started playing the way I knew I could play. Yeah. And then I caught fire because I just started to believe in myself, and then the final piece was I got to hit with guys like this. I was hitting with some of the players that to me I was a little bit better than. And you always get better by playing with the better players. Yeah. And I was just loving it because I was playing with the best players, and then you play against the best players, and then you started stressing them out, and they were starting to miss, and you start winning, and it was a very cool period where I was just felt like I couldn't lose, and then I started losing. But it was
reality set in.
Small spurt.
Of course.
Yeah.
We'll go two more.
Sure. Right. Biggest inspiration.
Inspiration. Well,
not just tennis, but what made you start here? What made you do
this? I mean, in life, I still, that story I just told about tennis definitely still has been something that I've sort of used that as inspiration for a lot of things. I never thought, you could have asked me 10 years out of school, do you ever want to start your own business? And I was like, no thanks. But I went down to Greenwich. I did a residency program down there at Elite Health Services. Had a blast down there, and I was inspired by some amazing PTs and a lot of people who are just so driven. And so just so many different people who are very, very hungry individuals. I meet people who are hungry tennis players, and they're 55 years old, and they're like, I play every single day at the beach club, or I play, and I'm like, wow. Good for you, but I love when people are motivated and passionate and driven. Those types of things have inspired me to, those great stories, the Cinderella stories. I'm always an underdog guy, so, George Mason, UConn, there's been some pretty fun, inspiring stories where I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool to see. Kemba Walker, look at this guy.
Let's go, Celts.
Yeah.
That's my boy.
Yeah.
All right, last question, and we'll round this up. Obviously, you're a big tennis player. You've played tennis for the majority of your life.
Yep.
Besides tennis, what is your favorite sport? What is your favorite city to root for and favorite professional team?
Oh, that's an easy
Those
one.
are 3 questions.
Yeah,
Right?
so
Yeah, I said boom, boom, boom. Let's go.
ice hockey, Washington Capitals.
Okay.
And was there a third piece of that? I mean, I'm a big Alex Ovechkin fan.
Fair.
There you go.
But
At least
just
it's not
Washington
Boston.
D.C. That's where I grew up. So I've learned to love to hate the New England and New York teams by living up here for a long time.
Yeah.
and
That's
it's been
respectable, though.
It's
Yeah.
been fun now that Washington teams have finally started to win a little bit lately because,
2
man, there was like...
championships.
All they had to do
5
was
years.
change their name to the most mundane name ever. What is it? The Washington football team?
Well,
There you
they're
go.
not winning yet.
No.
But the
still
Nationals
suck.
and the Capitals, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But that's like, now we're going to go another 40 years without anything.
That's
I mean,
fine.
well,
You had your glory.
the Patriots will be back in 5 years or
Yeah,
something.
man, you know it. You know it. Awesome.
Yeah, man.
Cool. Well, listen, thank you, Brian, for having us here at Peak Performance Therapy and Wellness.
Thanks for coming out.
Hey,
No, thank you.
yeah, I couldn't have been educated more today.
This was a lot of fun.
Really fun. Please, guys, if you are ailing or you're hurt, this is the guy to see. We will put all of his contact information below, and this young man will send us off.
Make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe. If you aren't subscribed, make sure you are subscribed to our channel so that way you don't miss any new content we're doing here at Milford Indoor Tennis. We have a lot of instructional stuff coming up for you guys. And did you say you had a podcast too?
Yeah, we do actually. The Peak Pros podcast. That's how you can find us. We are on YouTube.
Fantastic.
And we're working on getting on Spotify. I think we might be on there soon. We might even be on there now, but we're working on that. So yeah, Peak PTW or Peak Pros Podcast.
Perfect. So make sure to go check out all those links down in the description below. And I hope to see you guys soon. Thank you guys.
Cheers.
Thank you.